Did you all hear that?
Yeah.
I just noticed that started doing it for me. Just letting everybody know. That's good. Okay. Cool. Well, I think let's get started. So welcome everybody to our the Outside and Share Art event, and this event is great. It's focusing on the Step Up Patient Artwork project and some of the participants which have taken part in those courses, which is great. So I am going to be sort of like the tech host, so I'm gonna you can just manage your mute button, so just be aware of any background noise and mute yourself. I'd really recommend, we've got a chat function, so whilst people are giving their presentations, if you have any feedback or questions, then please write in there. So we have 4 artists presenting today, so we should be done within an hour. But yeah, any questions? So I'm going to pass over to Kate. She can just tell you a bit more about the project and then introduce each artist. And over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Hannah. It's lovely to see everybody here today. And it's a real pleasure to be able to introduce 4 artists who have just taken part in our first round of Exploring Collections courses as part of our Patient Artwork New Dialogues project. The project is very generously funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund, and we have been delivering Exploring Collections courses with 3 organisations across the UK. So that's been with the Art Extraordinary Collection at Glasgow Museums in Glasgow, with the Mental Health Museum collection in Wakefield, and with the Glenside Hospital Museum collection in Bristol. So these artists are kind of at the start of a journey, so they've had their 10-week course and they've been exploring these various collections and have found an area of that collection that resonates with them, and have been doing some research and creative responding to those collections. And the project is going to culminate in exhibitions at each of these venues in 2022. So these artists' work will all be on show at the various venues across the UK next year. I'll talk a bit at the end about the next round of courses that we have open as part of this project, just in case anyone is interested, because they are all currently open for application. So I'll give a little bit more information once you've heard the very inspiring presentations from these artists and see if that makes you want to sign up to them. So without further ado, shall we go on to the next slide just to introduce the first artist. So unfortunately, Stuart can't be here today, but I'm going to show a video on his behalf. And Stuart took part in the course at Glasgow Museums in running from March to May this year. So I'm going to mute myself now and share Stuart's video for everybody. Just to check, can everybody see that? Great.
Yeah, just go ahead, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way things are shaped from an outsider artist point of view, I see the light and it's dynamite. Even though this rhymes, there are different ways to look at it. This is how I see outsider art. The ability to render into words shapes and feelings and emotions through the eyes of the artist or the audience. Can each piece of work made by an outsider artist truly be called outsider art? The first scribbles on a page or a misshapen face, can this be called art? Some clever people have been put down onto paper and said they were ill. Is that what makes outsider art different from all other parts of the art world? Are we, as outsider artists, trying to become like renowned artists, or are we just trying to make a simple statement as all other artists do? That's what outsider art means to me. I use colour and words to try to evolve myself in the art world. I have no training and only heard the term outsider arts a few years ago when I read it online. I now have a bit of knowledge through training from people and websites from around the world what outsider art is. I see the media as a good place to start. They only hold up to the light those artists who have found fame. I am not trying to criticise any part of the art world in any way. I am just stating a fact that outsider art runs parallel with the mainstream art world. maybe not as exposed as some of the artists, I think, when I say mainstream. There may be a fact in all the world. There may be part of the world which doesn't show itself, and the continuity of this part of the world revolves around art and artists who can see the world as such or have been excluded from the contemporary art world for being different, for differing facts, in my instance, mental health difficulties. The use of colours and shapes outside the art world attracts me. I've seen quite a lot of artwork by my peers and others outside the support group. I enjoy thinking about other artists and their glories and failures, as I was told by one outside artist that everything was practice, and I've also heard the saying, you're only as good as your last piece. I mainly create art as it gives me a release and something to do. A participation in some kind of art is always a good thing from my point of view. As the world turns and the media grows, as an outsider artist, I'd like to think that outsider art is only a little taste of what lives of the outsider artists. And it's only a fragment of the world that's seen through the eyes of someone with a condition. Maybe the outside world is mad, and those who create outsider art are speaking from a point of view of the sane. Splashes of colour make the day go faster. I can see other parts of the world through my eyes of someone I can identify with. I know that there are written books and made films of their manifestation. I have seen wonder in the world through the eyes of people clashes outside their artists. Maybe this is only a little part of the world as we look as only a little part of the time artists have. Like you hear a song and you like it and someone says, never heard the singer such and such. You go on to find out they were a great sensation in their time, but you never heard in your life of them. I think that's what outsider art is. Maybe somewhere in the world there's a small doorway into someone's life, and this doorway is a small picture or a poem, piece of writing or similar that can start you off on a journey to find out more about them and the world they live in. This may be a way to see the world and what is like for such a broad term as outsider artists. These are still only terms thrown together by one artist who coined the phrase. There are still artists who have still to come to light. There are still outsider artists who have not been recognised by anyone. And for these artists, we should look out for.
There we go. That was from Stuart there. I'll wait for you, Hannah, to put the presentation back up.
I think we can go straight to Pages. So...
Perfect. Okay. So we will go now to Paige Lyons, who took part in the Mental Health Museum course in Wakefield. So over to you, Paige.
Thank you.
Just made you co-host, so.
Sorry, technical issues. Right, okay, I can see everybody and my screen. Okay, so I'll begin. So hello, everybody. My name is Paige Lyons, and I'll be presenting my research and into the collection with you today, and my thoughts and what I discovered whilst researching. So these are a few initial theme interests I had when starting the course and when applying. I've always been heavily interested in narratives and personal stories, being an illustrator myself and studied illustration. So personal stories and narratives and how we communicate has been really something that inspires me a lot. Initially, I gravitated a lot towards Mary Frances Heaton's samplers, which are figure 2. So she was somebody I instantly wanted to research more about. And also I wanted to look into other people's experiences as well from a more personal level. And the book Proper People, which is pictured, features in my research as well. So when learning more about the history of the asylum and how it changed and developed over the years, I came across these images that really took my interest. Thinking about maybe what these people's experiences are like from a humane perspective rather than a medical. These images are from the Wellcome collection and are of patients who have been in the Wakefield Asylum and were taken by James Crichton Brown, who was a physician in the asylum from 1866, which he established kind of the asylum as a centre for research and believed through better understanding of nature and mental illness, it would help cure rates and lower admissions. So he started to make more detailed case notes and more frequently. It still lacked personal information, but these pictures were a part of the case notes. And I just found them really inviting and very honest. And I kind of just wanted to listen to these people and know their stories and what they were thinking at the time. And I think it gives a really nice juxtaposition and balance of the medical versus personal in these case notes. So when looking for more personal narratives and stories of people's experiences, the book Proper People that I mentioned really helped me explore this. It was basically research done by the author who's researched case notes and summarized this into the book. But the book really rooted my research, and there was a lot of stories I wanted to include, but there's too many. But these are a few that stood out for certain reasons on level of like representations and personal expression. So this is Mary. There's a few Marys, but this is one. Mary Hutton, who created a poem in response to her care, which she had quite a positive experience. And it was published in the local newspaper, and it looked quite good on the asylum, I guess. But regardless, it expressed her own experience and gave an insight to how she found her care at the asylum. Another Mary Tinker, is 37-year-old, and her case notes stood out to me because they were descriptive, but in a very different way. They described her physical description as well as maybe how she was acting and what she was doing in the asylum. And I kind of found that really interesting and maybe wondered why they did that. But to me, it just conjured up this image of Mary in my imagination, and it gave me like a narrative, but from a totally different perspective, kind of through the eyes of the physician while the nurse creating these case notes. And I thought it was just interesting what they commented on. I just want to talk about a document that I came across in the research quite early on, which was introduced to us, which is called Reasons for Admission. It is what it's titled. It's a list of patients admitted to the asylum between 1818 and 1838, and lists their reasons for admissions and whether they were male, female, and if they were cured, how many were admitted, and other details. But I was kind of focused on the reasons down the left. At first, they can kind of sound a little shocking and maybe a bit strange, but I think having a little time to think about it and think about this idea of the understanding of mental health and the use of language back then was so different that some of it actually makes quite a lot of sense. And I don't think everybody would agree with all of these, but I think it gave a sense of story. It gave a sense of story of a person in a medicalized format, and maybe hints towards like the reasons that how they became possibly ill with mental health and what led to their admission. So I just wanted to include that because I found that really interesting. So moving on to Mary Frances Eaton, who I mentioned initially, who created the samplers, who was somebody who stood out to me as a person with creative expression. And she was somebody I wanted to just instantly know more about. She was an example of a patient trying to express her own story and creatively using craft, using word and image. And this quote by Mary really resonated with me because it really kind of tells her story within a few lines, and how she wasn't listened to, and it's really relevant. So I'll just talk a bit about Mary, because obviously people don't know much about her, but she was born in Doncaster and had quite a nice, early privileged life, but her family had problems, and her father dies and they become bankrupt. In 1837, she allegedly causes a disturbance in the Doncaster Parish Church, asking for payments for music lessons given to the mayor's children over quite a few months. And this didn't go down very well. And unfortunately, after of it going to kind of courts, she was sent to the asylum, and unfortunately spent the rest of her time in the asylum care. With Mary's story, I got the most information about her experience, and I think that's kind of why I wanted to focus on her. And you could see her voice firsthand. And on the right, started some case notes which I picked out, and she had a nickname called Miss H, which shows she was really well known through the staff, and maybe not for the right reasons, and kind of how she acted and her manner. She was quite wild and had a flightiness to her. And these are some snippets of more notes that I gathered, which just tell kind of details more of a personal level and of her experience. Interestingly, on the 16th of January, she tries to stitch a letter into a patient's clothes who was being about to leave the establishment, to a gentleman in Doncaster. I'm not sure what the letter said, but it was found out and the letter was stopped, unfortunately. But this just kind of leans more towards this idea of silencing of a voice. And on the right, there's just more notes about her, the vision she had, and also maybe this idea of self-awareness and how she was feeling acting, which wasn't really prevalent with other patients. So I found that quite interesting. So a bit about Mary's samplers, which are amazing. They simply document her story and her experience, her life, her interests, her treatments, and her injustice. They are very muddled together and hard to decipher, and they sometimes contain multiple stories in one sampler, using like symbols and number references to represent different things, and even on some of them there's proof of payments, like almost like a receipt. So I wanted to learn more about these, and this sampler was probably the most important one, which was, obviously you can't read it, but there's like a snippet at the bottom which I pulled from it. It was a letter to the British government, and it basically was just telling her story about what happened and how she came into the asylum and how she felt kind of she wasn't treated correctly, and she didn't, she had a right to express her view and she shouldn't be in the asylum, and just expressing her side of the story. But it also tells us a bit more about her life and quite biographic, and also more proof of kind of payments being made. So yeah, I mean, it's really crazy to think how long this must have took her to do. So I did start to build up different views of Mary, and when I was doing research at the museum, Maria Innocent, who works at the museum on community projects, she told me how she found out about Mary and how she had all these different views of her. And she got told one story and then another. And that really resonated with me, because I was kind of getting that, like, there's these different multiple views of Mary in terms of how she was being represented and the different voices of stories. So it got me thinking about how we retell these stories and how the importance of being careful on how information is being represented. So these are a few examples of Mary's story being represented more currently in like 2018, 2020. There's a blue plaque which has been put up in Wakefield about Mary, kind of honouring lost women of Wakefield, and Mary has been included in that, and then a few other news articles and some tweet kind of information from somebody. And I think definitely it's important to talk about these stories, but I had this feeling that there has to be some kind of sensitivity towards the person's story and how it reflects on current conversations around mental health. So I think we have to be maybe careful about how it's presented, and some of this information I didn't agree with, but I think it's hard, and I think it's just making sure we're careful about being responsible and not creating more stigma around mental health and adding to any issues of silencing, and how we should take care when we're retelling people's stories that are not around anymore. So these are a few kind of questions and thoughts that I got from my research. I had a lot, but these are a few. The idea of kind of like what would Mary do now if she could speak her voice? How do we record stories and people's experiences in healthcare? And how do these past stories help challenge current perceptions? And also the importance of arts and how art can be a mode of expression when verbal expression is not there for somebody. And yeah, with Mary's story, I think to the other people in the asylum, she probably looks like she was just doing some craft and just passing the time, but actually it was a really kind of important thing to her, and was a record of her story that still is around today. So with my ideas for some work that I want to do for the exhibition, I'm definitely interested in using illustration as a mode to interpret stories and kind of bring maybe people's stories that are lost or are just kind of tucked away, and that visualize them, that people can learn more about and be engaging for everybody. I'm not sure quite what mode I want that in yet. Obviously, thinking about COVID restrictions, I don't know how things are going to change, but I was interested in doing something visual, either an animation or some illustration work on the walls, as well as a workshop kind of gathering stories possibly. But I think I'm going to have to just see what happens with that. And possibly engaging on online space could be a good option. But yeah, I think I'll just probably come to that when I need to. But yeah, my main interest was kind of this importance of self-expression and using my practice to kind of visualize these stories. And that's it. They're just references.
Great. Thank you, Paige. That was really interesting.
No worries.
So thank you for sharing your research with us, and I'm very excited to see big round of applause what comes from that. So yeah, it's very exciting.
Thank you.
So if we now pass over to Belle, who's going to do their own presentation as well. So over to you, Belle.
Hello everybody. I'm going to attempt to do the same as Paige and hope that the Zoom gremlins aren't gonna mess it up. Here we go. Ta-da! Okay, is that coming up for folks?
Was it the images, Belle? Was it the?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just like Oh, okay, it did. Excellent.
Yeah, that came up
Apologies,
fine. Yeah,
everyone.
sorry, I couldn't
Excellent.
unmute myself quick enough.
Quite all right. No worries at all. Here we go. So let's start at the beginning. Here we are. Excellent. So thank you everyone for coming along today. I was able to take part in the same course as Stuart and as Grant in Glasgow. And as you can probably tell from my accent, I wasn't born in Glasgow, but I've lived here for the last probably nearly 12 years now. And we looked at a collection of artworks created and collected within psychiatric institutions in Scotland. And the woman who did that collecting was called Joyce Lang, and she was one of the first people to really encourage art therapy within psychiatric settings. So we looked through all sorts of different types of work from all sorts of different types of artists, and looking through that work, I was trying to draw similarities between my work and the artist's work that I was seeing. And I think actually this works well with what Paige was just talking about. And one of the things that came up a lot was the use of traditional crafts. So here I've got some wee bits and bobs that I made when I was in kind of more full-time psychiatric care. So this is an embroidery on the left here, and in the middle there is a glove that is halfway knitted, so it's knitted in the round and you kind of knit it as a tube, and then on the right is a wee blanket I made as a gift for a friend. And I noticed that for myself, I really enjoyed doing these crafts when I wasn't well, because unlike observational drawing or sculpture or things that take quite a lot of processing space, these crafts were similar stitches, they were repetitive, there was that rhythm, and they, especially with the blankets where it's a similar stitch over and over again, it really was part of a really important grounding and soothing thing for me. And another thing that I noticed with my work that matched the work of other artists was a lot of artists didn't keep their work. They either gifted it to people, or in the case of several artists, it was just kind of abandoned and left. So I had a look at my work, and usually if I'm knitting or creating stuff, it then goes out to friends or charity shops or donation centres, and doesn't get kept or kind of stored in a sketchbook or kept in a box anywhere. The way that my work differed slightly was with what I like to call shouty politics. So a lot of the work in the collection was, I would argue, definitely had really strong politics behind it about the worth of outsider arts and the role of people with mental health conditions and how people are cared for. But a lot of the time it wasn't quite as shouty as a lot of the stuff that I do. So these are two things that I made just out of old cardboard. The one on the left is made out of old cardboard boxes, and the one on the right is made out of an old tissue box, I think. And they were gifts that were made for friends who were going through the current DWP kind of assessment process for job seekers or for disability benefits. So I think that was when my work differed slightly. And I guess that's a privilege of mine because I'm making outside of an institution now. So I don't have anyone telling me that I'm not allowed to make shouty, angry things, which is maybe not something that other folks have had access to. There were two artists that really have influenced my work. One of them is Adam Christie, who sculpted stones and rocks he found in and around the grounds of the institution he was in, and he used to sculpt them into faces and then place them back in walls so they'd be kind of found later on. And then another artist, Angus Mcphee, who would use grasses to weave clothing. And because both of these artists use natural materials, I thought I'd go to my local park and I would find some natural materials. So this is some apple blossom falling from the trees, I believe. And I kept these materials in Tupperware boxes. Because Joyce kept a lot of her collections in Tupperware and cardboard boxes and sort of cheap packaging, and kept it in her attic, and I quite liked the idea of outside art rather than being kept pristine and carefully archived and carefully looked after. There's something a bit kind of DIY about the way it's collected. The other material I found whilst I was out and about was ivy, and it had a similar shape to the pieces you'd use in a piece of patchwork. This particular patchwork is called like a clamshell patchwork. And because of the shape of the ivy, I was wondering if I could make maybe a big quilt out of those shapes, which would then slowly decay as the ivy leaves decayed. So as I mentioned before, one of the artists who really impacted my work was Angus Mcphee. And this is a little image of his grass knitted or grass woven clothing. This is a close-up of a jacket. And a lot of his pieces of clothing were made really, really big, like giant size. He often just abandoned them under hedges when he'd finished with them and started again. So you could go around and find these huge giant clothes just sort of, unsuspected under a hedge one day. And the idea of using clothing and using jackets in particular came up a lot in the research that I did. So here we've got two other jackets made out of natural materials. So the one on the left is by an Irish artist, Alice Mayer, and that's made of stinging nettles and pins. So this really idea of a jacket that's really spiky and a lot of connotations of like maybe discomfort and all sorts of things. And then on the right, we've got an image of a jacket made by Mike Inglis, and that was made, he describes it as a fungus jacket. So you can kind of see the detail around the collar there as well. And the jackets seem to have a really important link to psychiatric care because of the connotations of the straitjacket and the restriction of that. But also for myself as a member of the LGBT community, the jacket or the blazer's got a really long history in the queer community as quite an empowering and bold thing. And so there was an interesting mix there. So I decided to make my own jacket. Started out with a little tiny jacket, just as a little kind of demo. It's sewed up with really cheap cotton thread from B&M's. And I've been storing it in this Tupperware to keep the Tupperware theme going. And then whilst walking around in Queen's Park, which is my local park, I discovered, weirdly, this woven wicker basket, which seemed sort of half finished and had been left in a pond. It was there one day and I went back the next day and it had disappeared. So I have no idea what the story is behind this beautiful vessel. But I really enjoyed finding it because it's a traditional technique, and basket weaving is also something that's tied in with psychiatric care. And there's the ideas of like the basket case. And also willow is very important to my original home county of Somerset, because willow is grown to suck up all the excess water and make the land more farmer friendly. So I really enjoyed finding this and finding this little gift that had been left behind. And it really made me think of an artist called Gordon Anderson, who I think Stuart had mentioned in his video, who made this beautiful Moses basket, which the lid could be lifted off and you could see this tiny figure of a child swaddled in there. And yeah, this is just another wee close-up of the string that was used. As I say, I never found out who or what this basket was for, so I quite enjoyed that mystery, the same way as you'd find Adam Christie's heads in stonework around that place, or you might find Angus Mcphee's clothes hidden with no explanation for being there. And here we are. So this is a page of the sketchbook from the course where Claire took us through a writing exercise where we wrote a paragraph and then refined it and refined it and refined it to get a single word. And the word that I came up with was vessel, which seemed to fit with the basket idea really nicely. And I quite like the idea of a vessel both as being something that can offer protection and support and buoyancy and safety, and also something that might offer restriction or dependence. And I think looking over all the work of people in psychiatric settings and of disabled people in general, that's something we have to balance a huge amount of the time is, how much is this supporting me? How much is this of benefit to me? Or how much is this restricting me, and how dependent am I on something or someone else? And there's that constant negotiation going on. So from here, the places I'd really like to go is to try and make that ivy quilt out of leaves, and somehow document that as it kind of decays. I would love to try and make some more wicker vessels or wicker things that could even maybe float on the ponds in the park near me, just to see if people found them. I really like the idea as well of leaving gifts around my local park, as sort of like this idea of little presents, things that are made and then left for other people to find. And then also thinking about all of these natural materials which were used by Adam and by Angus because they were what was available in their rural environment, whereas I'm now living in an urban environment and I'm in the 21st century, and often the materials available to me are very much plastic, synthetic materials, so things like Tupperware or plastic bags, cans and bottles, and lots of materials that definitely wouldn't have been available back when those two artists were working. So I'd be interested to work with those two types of materials to see maybe where they could meet in an interesting way. So yeah, that's I think everything that we covered in the course. Let me here we go. See if I can stop screen sharing for you. Aha.
Yay. Thank you so much, Belle. That was again so interesting, and I just love that little ivy jacket. That was just brilliant. And also just great to see you using some of Joyce's ideas in terms of how she stored the work and everything as well. I think that's the idea of the collector and their role in all of that as well, I think is fascinating. So yes, very much looking forward to seeing the ivy quilt and seeing where that goes. But yeah, well done, Belle. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So our final session today is from Grant Glennie, who took part in the Glasgow course as well. And I'm going to share a video that Grant has made. So without further ado, I will mute myself and then show you the video.
Hi, my name's Grant and I've been part of the 10-week Exploring Collections course created by Outside In and Glasgow Museums. We have had a range of excellent talks during this project, all exploring different artists within and different themes around the Art Extraordinary collection. We have also had excellent creative tasks and workshops throughout this process, which I felt taught me not to overthink things and work with whatever materials I have at hand. This image is a random repetition of the capital letter L. During the drawing process, it began to make me think about a maze. But as a maze, which is more than one entry and exit point, I drew one line randomly, which for me represents a path in life. This image came from a reductive process where I wrote a small paragraph about an artwork. I then reduced this to a few lines and then a few words. I chose the word infinity at the end of the process. This image was the result of trying to create a sculpture using objects found in my kitchen drawer. I decided to start with an old chisel I found. Then I began attaching Allen keys. I really enjoyed this process, which as I made it began giving me other ideas of what I could make. Today I want to share the artists and themes I feel interested in or have a connection with in the Art Extraordinary collection. The first thing I found of interest is that the collection is mainly made of cheap, non-traditional art materials which are dry and delicate. Because of this, the collection almost wants to decay or fall apart. This can be seen specifically with the work of Angus Mcphee and his grass knotting objects. The collection is not viewed as high art and as such is not viewed as having any monetary value. Art extraordinary can be described as visual art forms created by individuals who paint, sculpt, sketch or draw due to a compulsion to express an intense personal vision. Although outsider art has more strands to it, for instance, art made while confined in prison, this collection seems to me to be more about psychiatric hospitals, mental health and perceived compulsions. I myself have produced work within the context of a psychiatric hospital and can relate to that idea of having a compulsion to do or make something. In week 2, I saw the work of Antonia Jablona for the first time. She was the first artist that led to the beginning of the Art Extraordinary collection. I was drawn to the embroidery of Antonia, specifically the imagined architecture work. I only saw the work for like a minute, but it reminded me of a concept within coding called a random walker. I felt compelled to look at the work and try and understand what the artist was creating. The work seemed to start in the centre and radiate outwards, but it could also have started from the edges and worked its way inwards. There were several what seemed like random paths of different colours. The steps were geometric in nature, up, down, left or right. This work was done using the medium of embroidery, but it has a very computational look to it. Computational art doesn't necessarily mean done on a computer. An example of this could be textiles, weaving and embroidery. These have certain rule sets which are often repeated, much like instructions for a person, machine or computer to follow. Not much is known about this artist, other than she was diagnosed with schizophrenia after being found wandering the roads of northern Scotland alone in a distressed state. She then spent the rest of her life in a psychiatric hospital in Aberdeen. She was from Vienna, and due to the Second World War, it was impossible to get her home or even contact relatives. This description, I feel, fits with the work, as to me the paths or roads are random and a kind of wandering. Thinking back to periods I'd been unwell, I too used to do a lot of walking, often back and forth, or wandering the streets, was she trying to find her way back home. In week 4, we had a talk by Dr. Kath Kay about Antonia and had a chance to look at more of her practice and her work in the Art Extraordinary collection. I was already drawn to this artist after seeing her work, Imagined Architectures, and seeing a visual similarity with this work and a concept called random walkers used in creative coding. We saw some more of her practice, which were in 2-line sketchbooks, one filled with colourful art and the other architectural drawings. I find this interesting as I have a collection of sketchbooks at home which inform my past practice and projects. She used no pre-drawings to commence on an elaborate embroidery or intricate drawing. As with all true outsiders, the inspiration flows from the mind. Although many of the artists in the collection received no formal art training, the technique used within her architectural drawings suggests that she had some architectural training. There was also more embroidery, which was more organic or floral compared with the imagined architecture piece. I feel a connection with her artistic and also architectural practice, with an embroidery work perhaps a meeting of both styles. I felt compelled when looking at this embroidery work to try and understand the underlying rules that led to its creation. At first I saw steps which were geometric in nature, up, down, left and right. On closer inspection, I can see the random paths also move in diagonals as well as up, down, left and right. Looking at the work, I felt there were around 9 random walkers, all of different colours. As well as rule sets, when I look at the work, I see a landscape made up of islands and rivers. I feel this is a very unique and interesting embroidery, which combines both her artistic and also architectural practice. The concept of a random walker involves instructions for a computer program to take random steps in predetermined directions. Leaving the program to run for a period of time leads to mark making. This is one walker moving pixel by pixel, either up, down, left and right. I let it run for around 20 minutes. This one is walking more to the left, but this is a random process. This is still one walker, but is drawing rects and not points, and steps 5 pixels at a time, which is creating a different look to the first. I let this one run for about 10 minutes. If I left it running long enough, it would eventually fill the screen. At this point, I was working with 9 random walkers at one time. I also changed the instruction to include steps in a diagonal manner. I began thinking about a projection, so I included different levels of brightness. The more a step is repeated, the higher the level of white becomes. I also included a time limit. This one ran for 1 minute exactly. With this image, I'm thinking about using a digital process with an analogue outcome. I feel I could use the image as a template for some embroidery work or textiles. I feel visually like with Antonia's work it resembles a landscape. I see using the random walker method as being a metaphor for the wandering she was doing around the Scottish Highlands before being admitted to hospital. With this image, I'm experimenting with random walkers and pushing the number to the maximum. This is 40,000. I feel that it is starting to take a different direction and beginning to show behaviour, almost like a swarm. They are still moving in geometric steps, but with the high number, they seem to be behaving more chaotically.
There we go, and that was from Grant Glennie. That was amazing. Watching those videos of the walkers, I think it was absolutely mesmerising. So thank you, Grant, for that. Very well done. So that brings us to the end of today's presentations. Before we go, I'm just going to post in the chat the link to information on the new courses that are open for applications at the moment. So the only requirements are you do need to be based in the geographic area of each venue. That's due to our funding requirements. So either if you're around Wakefield, if you're around Glasgow, or if you're around Bristol, then please do have a look. And if you kind of align yourself with outside in criteria, you're very welcome to apply. And if you have any questions about the courses, please do get in touch. We're very happy to help if you need support with your application or you have any questions. So I'm going to post that link now into the chat. But yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to the artists who presented today. It's just amazing seeing the progress and kind of the journeys that you've all been on since I first met you when you applied for the course, and now with all your amazing creative ideas and kind of the inspiration you've taken from the various collections. It's just really amazing to see. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody who's joined us today in the audience as well. It's been great to have you here. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much. Great to see you all and brilliant presentations. Yeah, and take care and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Take care, everyone. Thank you. It was absolutely superb. Thank you very much, Hannah, and especially all the artists. So thank you.